Look, I hadn't driven that road in 3 years. 3 long years. The kind of years that feel like a lifetime when you've been away from a place that raised you. The dirt road winding through the pines outside a little town I'll call Cedar Ridge was exactly the same as I remembered. Same dusty turns, same crooked fence lines, same mountain air that smells like cold stone and pine sap. I figured the first thing I'd notice would be the old cabin my dad and I built together when I was 22. But it wasn't the cabin. Not the porch. Not the smoke-stained chimney. Nope. The first thing I saw was a woman hammering a bright orange "No Trespassing" sign onto my front gate like she was planting a flag on conquered land. She was blonde, maybe mid-40s, wearing one of those pastel sweaters that looks expensive but somehow still screams suburban HOA meeting. And she wasn't just putting up the sign. She was stepping back and admiring it like it was a trophy. I slowed the truck to a stop, engine still rumbling, dust drifting past the windshield, and before I even opened the door, she turned around and pointed straight at me. "Excuse me," she shouted across the yard. "You can't be here." I stepped out of the truck slowly, boots hitting gravel. "You're trespassing," she added, loud enough for the trees to hear. "This property is under community protection. Leave before I call the police." Now I'm going to be honest. I laughed, not because it was funny, because sometimes when someone says something so ridiculous your brain takes a second to process it, and laughter just slips out. I looked at the sign she'd nailed into my cedar post, and then back at her. "Ma'am," I said, "this is my land." That's when her eyes narrowed like I'd just insulted her personally. "Oh, don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "I'm the president of the Ridgewood Property Association now, and according to our bylaws this land was abandoned years ago. That cabin doesn't belong to you anymore." And right about then I noticed something else. People. Neighbors. A handful of them standing down by the road, watching the whole thing like it was Saturday night entertainment. Whispering to each other. One older guy leaning on a truck door muttered under his breath, "Here we go again." That line stuck with me. "Here we go again." Meaning this woman, let's call her Brenda Lawson, had done this before. I walked up to the gate slowly, gravel crunching under my boots, and looked at the sign again. "You put that up 5 minutes ago?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "I put it up because someone needed to keep this place under control," she said. "You abandoned it. I've been maintaining order around here." Maintaining order. Now I'm standing there thinking, "Lady, I built this fence with my own hands. My dad helped me set those posts when I was still young enough to think manual labor was fun. But I kept my voice calm. You're saying the homeowners association took my land?" She smirked like she'd been waiting for that question. Exactly. Now that's when my patience started warming up, not boiling yet, but definitely heating. "Interesting," I said, "because I don't remember signing over my deed." Her smile widened. "You don't get a say anymore, sweetheart. You disappeared. The community had to step in." Behind her, the little crowd shifted awkwardly. Nobody spoke up, and that silence told me something important. These people had been living under whatever nonsense this woman was selling for a while. I leaned on the gate and said one simple thing. "Go ahead. Call the police." She blinked like she hadn't expected that answer. "You want me to?" "Please." And man, she was ready. Phone already in her hand. She dialed and turned her back to me just enough so the audience, I mean the neighbors, could hear her performance. "Yes, hello," she said loudly. "There's a trespasser on my property. He's aggressive and possibly armed." Now hold on. Aggressive? Armed? I hadn't even raised my voice. But that's how it goes sometimes. People who know they're lying tend to go big with the lie. I folded my arms. "False report's a crime," I told her calmly. She waved me off. "We'll see who's committing crimes when the sheriff gets here." Then she added, with that smug smile again, "Enjoy your last few minutes of freedom." Now here's the thing about small mountain towns, sirens travel. You hear them long before you see them. And about 2 minutes later, that familiar wail started echoing through the valley. The neighbors stepped back from the road. Brenda straightened up like she'd just summoned cavalry into battle. A sheriff's cruiser rolled up the dirt road and stopped near the gate. Dust swirling everywhere. The deputy stepped out slow, hand resting near his belt, scanning the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked. Brenda practically ran to him. "That man is trespassing," she said, pointing at me like she was accusing someone in a courtroom. "He threatened me and refuses to leave." The deputy looked at me. "Sir." I shrugged. "Nope. This is my cabin. My land. My deed." Brenda burst out laughing. "Oh, please. He abandoned this place years ago. The association seized it legally. The deputy looked back at her and said something that made the whole yard go quiet. Ma'am, this county doesn't recognize HOA authority outside city limits. For a split second, just a split second, her face twitched. Then she doubled down. He's lying. Check the records. The deputy nodded. Good idea. He stepped aside and started talking into his radio. Dispatch began checking the property registry. And suddenly, the entire valley went silent. Brenda folded her arms, trying to look confident. But I could see it. That little twitch in her jaw. She was nervous now, and I leaned against the porch railing and said quietly, "You sure you want to do this, Brenda?" Because when those records came back, her whole little kingdom was about to fall apart. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is the part where things get interesting, not just dramatic, but legally interesting. And trust me, if you've ever lived anywhere near a homeowners association, you know exactly why. See, a lot of people hear the term HOA and assume it's some kind of mini-government. Like they can just show up, make rules, seize property, tell you what color your mailbox can be, the whole 9 yards. And yeah, sometimes it feels that way. But from a legal perspective, HOAs actually have very specific limits. They only have authority over property that is formally included in their association documents, meaning recorded covenants, signed agreements, and filings with the county. If your land was never placed under those covenants, then the HOA has exactly zero power over it. None. According to standard procedure, any legitimate HOA has to be registered with the state, maintain public records, and operate under bylaws that homeowners agreed to when they bought their property. No agreement, no authority. Simple as that. So when Brenda stood there claiming the association had taken control of my land because I'd been gone a few years, that wasn't just wrong, it was legally impossible. Property rights don't just evaporate because someone goes on a long trip. Taxes get paid, deeds stay recorded, ownership remains exactly where the county says it is. But here's where the psychology comes in, and this is something you see a lot in small communities. This is a psychological trap. Someone steps into a leadership role, starts making confident statements about rules and authority, maybe throws around some official-sounding language, and before long people start assuming that authority must be real. Nobody wants conflict with the person who claims to be in charge, so neighbors stay quiet. They go along with it. And once someone like Brenda realizes nobody is pushing back, the story they're telling gets bigger, and bigger, and bigger, until eventually they believe it themselves. Which is exactly why I was leaning on that porch rail waiting for the radio to crackle. Because once the county records came back, reality was about to hit that yard like a freight train. So we're all standing there in this quiet little valley, wind moving through the pine trees, dust still settling from the patrol car, and the deputy's radio finally crackles back to life. You could practically feel everyone lean forward without actually moving. Dispatch read off the parcel number, then the deed record, and finally the owner's name. My name. Clear as day. The deputy glanced up from his radio and looked straight at Brenda. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "county records confirm this property belongs to him." And for a second, just 1 second, you could see the confidence drain right out of her face. But some people, when they get caught in a lie, don't back down. They double down. Brenda forced out a laugh that sounded about as natural as a car alarm in church. "Well, obviously the paperwork hasn't been updated yet," she said quickly. "I filed claims through the association months ago. He abandoned the property, which means it defaults to community management." Now the deputy didn't even respond right away. He just raised one eyebrow the way officers do when someone says something incredibly stupid. Behind Brenda, the neighbors shifted around again. One of them muttered quietly, "That's not how that works." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Funny you mentioned paperwork," I said. I held it up so everyone could see the county seal. "This is the updated deed confirmation from last month. Taxes paid. Ownership verified." The deputy took a quick glance and nodded. Brenda's face started turning pale, but she still wasn't done. "That's forged," she snapped suddenly, pointing at me like she'd just solved a mystery. "Don't believe him. He threatened me earlier. He said he'd hurt me if I didn't leave." The deputy turned toward the group of neighbors. "Did anyone hear that?" And the whole crowd went quiet again. Then a woman wearing a wide straw hat stepped forward just a little. "Officer," she said carefully, "that's not what happened." Brenda spun around toward her like a snake striking. "You stay out of this," she hissed. But the woman continued anyway. All he said was that it was his land. That was it. The deputy's tone changed right there. You could hear it. His voice got firmer. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, "filing a false police report is a serious offense. Posting fake notices on someone else's property can also be considered trespassing." Brenda's hands started shaking, but she tried to keep that same posture, arms crossed, chin up. "You don't understand," she said. "I've been protecting this neighborhood. If I hadn't stepped in, this place would have fallen apart." Now I didn't even respond, because right then another set of tires crunched up the dirt road. A second cruiser pulled in behind the first, and when the door opened, I felt something tighten in my chest. Because the man stepping out wasn't just another deputy. It was Sheriff Carter Hale. I hadn't seen him in years, but he'd known my family since before I could drive. Brenda, on the other hand, thought she'd just won the lottery. She hurried toward him, waving her arms. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here," she said breathlessly. "This man broke onto my property and threatened me. I'm the president of the community association and I demand you remove him immediately." Sheriff Hale didn't answer her, didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on me across the yard. For a moment he just stared. Then he shook his head slowly and let out a short laugh. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Thought you weren't ever coming back to Cedar Ridge." Brenda froze mid-sentence. "Wait, you know him?" The sheriff finally turned toward her. "Know him," he said. "His family's owned this valley longer than most of these trees have been standing." You could hear murmurs ripple through the neighbors behind her. But Brenda still tried to push back. "Sheriff, with all respect, you can't take his side just because you're friends. He abandoned the property. The HOA took control." Sheriff Hale's expression hardened instantly. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat as steel. "HOA authority ends where private deeds begin. And based on what I'm hearing here, you've been trespassing, harassing residents, and filing false reports." The air in that yard changed right then. Neighbors who had been quiet for months suddenly started whispering louder. The older man by the truck finally spoke up. "We told her plenty of times this wasn't her land," he said. "She kept saying the association had power here." A younger couple stepped forward next. "She told us we had to pay dues," the woman said nervously. "Said the county would fine us if we didn't." Sheriff Hale's head slowly turned back toward Brenda. "Dues?" Brenda's confidence cracked a little more. "It was for community improvements," she said quickly. "Road repairs, lake access, safety patrols." One of the deputies walked up beside the sheriff holding a small folder. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "we checked the state registry while dispatch was running the property record." The sheriff opened the folder, flipped through a couple pages, then looked straight at Brenda. "Interesting," he said slowly. "Care to explain why there's no registered HOA for this valley?" The silence that followed hit harder than any siren. Brenda's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That must be a mistake," she stammered. The deputy shook his head. "No filings. No charter. No incorporation." He paused. "Which means any money collected under that name would legally be considered fraud." And that's when the entire crowd exploded. Voices everywhere. "You took money from us. You said it was mandatory. We gave you $2,000 for that road repair." Brenda turned in circles trying to answer all of them at once. No, that money went toward community safety." But nobody was listening anymore. The sheriff raised one hand, and the crowd went quiet again. Then he looked directly at her. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "right now I'm looking at potential charges for fraud, impersonating authority, harassment, and filing a false police report." Brenda's eyes darted between the sheriff, the neighbors, and finally me. And for the first time since I pulled up that road, she looked scared. I stepped forward slowly, boots crunching in the dirt again. "Brenda," I said, "this could have been simple." She stared at me, shaking. "All you had to do was leave my land alone." The sheriff gave a small nod to one of the deputies. "Cuff her." The deputy pulled out the restraints and stepped forward. Brenda backed away, panic finally breaking through the arrogance. "No, wait, you can't do this," she said. "I'm the association president." That line made half the neighbors laugh out loud. Because now everyone understood. There was no association, no authority, just one woman who liked being in charge and figured nobody would challenge her. The cuffs clicked around her wrists. Cold metal. Final. As the deputy walked her toward the cruiser, she turned her head toward me one last time, and her voice dropped into a bitter whisper. This isn't over. Then the patrol car door slammed shut. The engine started. And just like that, the self-declared ruler of Cedar Ridge was on her way to jail. The yard stayed quiet for a moment after the cruiser pulled away. Then one of the neighbors walked up to me slowly. We should have spoken up sooner, he said. I shook my head. What matters is it's over. I walked back to the gate where that bright orange sign was still nailed into my fence post, grabbed it, and ripped it free with one hard pull. The wood split in half as I tossed it into the dirt. I looked at the crowd standing there in my yard and said the only thing that needed to be said. This land was mine yesterday, it's mine today, and nobody's taking it from me tomorrow. And for the first time in years, Cedar Ridge finally felt like home again. Now that the dust has settled and the patrol cars have disappeared down that same dirt road, this is the part of the story where we step back and look at what really happened. Because on the surface, sure, it's a dramatic small-town showdown. A woman pretends to run an HOA, gets caught, and ends up in cuffs. Satisfying ending, right? But the real lesson here runs a lot deeper than that. Because situations like this, they don't actually start with fraud. They start with silence. And that's something I've seen over and over in rural communities, neighborhoods, even workplaces. Someone steps forward and claims authority. Maybe they speak confidently. Maybe they throw around legal-sounding words. Maybe they act like they're the only person keeping order. And most people don't challenge it right away. Not because they believe it, but because they don't want conflict. From a legal perspective, that hesitation is exactly how situations like this grow into something dangerous. Property law in the United States is very clear about ownership. If your name is on the deed and your taxes are paid, that property is yours. Period. An HOA cannot simply appear one day and seize land unless the owner signed a covenant placing the property under that association. But here's the tricky part. Most people don't actually know that. They hear HOA rules, and they assume those rules must be legitimate. And that's where this is a psychological trap. Authority, even fake authority, has a strange power over groups of people. Once someone claims to be in charge, especially loudly and repeatedly, a lot of folks start behaving as if that authority must be real. It's a phenomenon psychologists sometimes call social proof. If everyone else seems to be accepting the rule, then maybe it's safer to accept it too. But the moment one person calmly pushes back, the illusion can collapse almost instantly. That's exactly what happened in Cedar Ridge. For months, maybe longer, Brenda had been building this narrative that she was protecting the valley, that she was enforcing rules, that she had legal backing. And the more people went along with it, the more confident she became, until eventually she believed she could claim someone else's land and nobody would question it. According to standard procedure, though, reality always catches up when law enforcement gets involved and records start getting checked. Property deeds, tax records, state registrations, those things don't care about someone's personal story. They care about documentation. And that brings us to the biggest lesson of this entire story. The lesson here is, confidence is not the same thing as authority. Someone can speak loudly. They can speak convincingly. They can even gather followers. But unless the law backs that authority up, unless the paperwork exists, it's just a story. Now there's another side to this too. Because while Brenda's actions crossed into fraud, the neighbors in that valley weren't villains. They were regular people trying to avoid trouble. When someone threatens fines, legal action, or community penalties, it creates pressure. Nobody wants to be the person who starts a fight with the self-appointed leader. And that's why speaking up can feel risky. But here's the truth. Silence often gives dishonest people exactly the space they need to keep going. The moment those neighbors realized the law was on their side, everything changed. Suddenly people started telling the truth about the dues they'd paid, the threats they'd heard, the pressure they'd felt. And that's the moment the entire scheme collapsed. So if there's one thing to remember from this story, it's this. Property rights, and honestly, most rights in general, only stay strong when people understand them and stand by them. Because freedom isn't something that protects itself automatically. Sometimes it takes someone standing on a porch, looking at a fake sign nailed into their own fence, and calmly saying, "No, that's not how this works." And I'm curious what you think about this one. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that tried to push its authority too far? Or maybe you've seen a situation where someone in a community started acting like they were in charge when they really weren't. Did people speak up right away, or did it take a moment like this for the truth to come out? Let me know your thoughts, because stories like this happen more often than people realize. And sometimes the best way to stop them is simply understanding the rules of the game before someone else tries to rewrite them.